Welcome and thank you for joining us for episode 12 of the GSS Jamaica Industry Hour podcast. This is the final episode of our podcast, and we bring this special initiative to a close. We want to take some time to reflect on the past 5 years of the GSS project by highlighting our accomplishments and the program successes to date. I'm Marjorie, Program Director for the GSS Project, and I'll be your host for today. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the skills development for global services, celebrating 5 years of the GSS project. We'll dive in and have a candid discussion about the project, its impact, its growth on Jamaica, and its contribution to the global services sector. Joining me today are my special guest, Shullette Cox, appointed president of JAMPRO in February 2023, passionate about the growth of the local companies through increased exports and investments, managing key initiatives such as the National Competitiveness Council, and looking at reforms nationally to improve the business environment of Jamaica. We also have Anand Biradar. Anand is currently president of the Global Services Association of Jamaica, formerly known as BPIAJ, has worked extensively in the global services sector, a member of the Global Services Sector Skills Council. He has worked with the HGS Healthcare, formerly Hinduja Global, in various capacities, including Vice President and Country Head for Jamaica, and now serves as the Senior Vice President and Head of Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Anand. Thank you. Egbert von Frankenberg is the President of the Global Services Sector Skills Council, originally from Berlin, Germany, but I can assure you, a true Yardie deep down. He's no longer, we should no longer be making reference to Egbert, and his original birthplace, because he's truly a Jamaican. Founder and CEO of Nightfox App Design Limited, that focuses on the need to provide quality software to the Caribbean and manages a number of international clients. Egbert is considered a subject matter expert on artificial intelligence and blockchain, and continues to guide the development of the skills framework in the GSS through his role as chair of the GSSC. Thank you all for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Well, I can't believe it's 5 years. I cannot believe it's 5 years. And for the audience who's listening, let me just share with you that these three persons who are no strangers to the global services sector, you'll hear me also, it will be interchangeable. We may refer to it as the digital global services sector. They're one and the same. Recently, Minister Hill wanted to have that emphasized with our general thrust on digital, to ensure that digital is included in the name. And the global services sector is what the project was designed and named as. But believe me, same industry if you hear us using those terms interchangeably. And these three persons are stalwart supporters of the GSS. Their individual and collective contribution, not just as persons, but their roles and the roles they play in the GSS, have significantly allowed for the project to deliver on the impact that it has achieved through the 5 years. So maybe I'll start with you, Shullette. Although recently appointed as president, you're no stranger to this sector and you're no stranger to the GSS. So perhaps for the benefit of the audience, share with us your own view of JAMPRO as the executing agency for this project, Skills Development for the Global Services Sector, how you've seen that role, and clarify for the audience how playing that role as the executing agency has supported the project to deliver on its requirements.
Thanks, Marjorie. And you're quite right. JAMPRO's role in this industry goes back to the beginning, over 20 years. And I think it was a natural progression for us to be the executing agency for this project, because 10 years ago, we were looking at how do we create a 5-year strategy for the outsourcing industry, something that the entire government and private sector could get behind to grow the industry from what was then about 14,000 to, we said, 36,000 at the time. And we did that strategy back in 2014, 2015. And coming out of that work is how this project was born. And I remember, even though I was not president at the time, I had the role of vice president, sitting with the Planning Institute of Jamaica to design what this would be.
Yes.
And kudos to Dan Edwards, my predecessor, who really championed the cause for this industry and made sure that once designed, the execution happened here, because we understood what the impact of this industry could be. And so as executing agency, we went through all of the approval processes and were able to kick off the project in 2019. And for us, it's really just been a continuation of the lobbying work that we've done, the partnership work that we've done with the industry. We were right there, Anand, when we started the Business Process Industry Association many, many years ago. And I think this industry association and this partnership has shown what public and private sector together, working together, can do. Over the years, for us in JAMPRO, we have gotten a lot of support ourselves from the project in our promotional work, in branding Jamaica beyond the call center work. I mean, when I look at companies such as Egbert's and Anand's today, we would never have thought that we would be doing software development or healthcare work in Jamaica when we saw where this industry was going 10, 15 years ago. But that's where we are now. And now that we're in that space, I'm just excited to see how we get deeper into that space in the years to come, and how we cement Jamaica's position regionally as a global digital services provider to the world. So for me, it's been 5 fabulous years of support and partnership, but it's also about what the future brings and how we'll continue to take the lessons that we've learned of the last 5 years into the future.
Thank you, Shullette. And it's interesting. You mentioned the private-public partnership, one that is so recognized internationally, that this project and the global services skills sector have been asked from time to time to share our best practices. And perhaps the first and I would say one of the most important actions that we took very early on was the formation of the Global Services Sector Skills Council. Egbert, you were there toe-to-toe with us from day one. And, you've seen even the growth of the GSSC, as we refer to it, and the Skills Council. So share with us the role that you witnessed firsthand when you were vice chair. Yanni Epstein was chair at the time, and now you've taken over the realm, and you've been leading the charge for more than a year now. Highlight the role of the Skills Council in positioning a sector to be responsive to emerging roles and new skill requirements.
Yeah, absolutely, Marjorie. I think starting with the Skills Sector Council board was the right start for this project, because it set the tone from the get-go and the expectations between the private sector and the government, and how to work together and how to strategize together and how to use these 5 years effectively. Yeah. And the outcome out of it has been tremendous, because this communicative approach and this strategy that went in there helped the bodies such as HEART and others in the tertiary levels, and the Ministry of Education as well, to find ways to guide and provide courses that were acceptable by the industry and allowed the industry to trust that these young people that would then come into the workforce, or the people that were cross-trained, are actually effective in what they're doing.
Thank you, Egbert. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I don't think sometimes, Shullette, persons really understand, and I do believe that JAMPRO is doing such a stellar job at this, has always done, because we believe in the role of private sector in engagements and making them central to decisions that we're contemplating, or getting them in as solutions partner. I know that, being an alum of JAMPRO, if I can say it that way, that I know that we have seen favorable results of those types of partnership. But just before I allow you to come in more on that, Shullette and Egbert, Anand, in your role as president of the Global Services Association of Jamaica, because you are that third variable in the equation, so to speak, of this private-public partnership, what is the role of an industry association in this kind of context, where we're looking at skills and an ecosystem that will be attractive to investors? What role can the industry association play to drive growth for a sector? And why is it important to have an industry association?
Great, thanks, Marjorie. This is close to $1 billion in exports, right? So it's a sizable part of the GDP for Jamaica, and over 60,000 employees in the sector. And when such is a scenario, you need a lobbying body which brings the concerns, opportunities, and what's going on great in the industry. Bring those stories together and be that voice, be that face, and advocate for the industry, and help work with Jamaica, JAMPRO, Jamaican government to look at the facts, look at data, look at opportunities, and plan the best possible future as Jamaica evolves. I think that's really the role that GSAJ has been playing, it has a very strong board, a very experienced board, part of the private sector, and there's JAMPRO representative on the board. So it's a very balanced board which guides the association to do the right things. And I've said it so many times. I've lived and worked in so many different countries and cultures. Now I live here, and by far the smoothest experience in setting up a country and business has been for me in Jamaica.
Well, that's a kudos to JAMPRO. Let me just give that plug right away. But I want to paint, because I'm taking time to paint to the audience what it means to have these three powerful forces or bodies, institutions coalescing in the interest of an industry. Because for the first time in a long time, and let me take a minute and share some of the achievements that have resulted because of this private-public partnership. So the first thing that came out was that we shifted the conversation from supply-driven considerations for skills to demand-driven. What do we mean by that? Clearly, industry has to say. No one else has a better pulse globally and all the trends and the emerging roles than the industry itself. So who better to guide a government, who better to guide a country for an industry that is such a significant contributor, right, Shullette, to the economy, on what skills we need to be preparing our workforce for. And so one of the first order of the day in the GSSC, I remember, was to look at that exactly, to say, what do we need to do? And that gave birth to the GSS Apprenticeship Programme. We are going to end the program having upskilled approximately 2,000 persons in apprenticeship, in leadership and management, and in supervisory management training. Right? No small feat. Upskilling this many persons and seeing them being absorbed in those new roles and functions in GSS firms is considered a significant achievement by the project and for the industry. We've also seen where through the GSSC, recognizing that they wanted to operate from an evidence-based approach, decided to, through the project, that we should have an industry skills upgrade strategy. Wanting to understand the skills, in fact, that is how the leadership and management training was decided on, because that was one of the recommendations that came out of the industry skills upgrade strategy. Others were cybersecurity. We see more and more the need for that, and training was done. There were tools, because this body also recognized that persons at the time, remember, take us back to 2018, 2019, 2020, just before COVID, the perception of the industry was different. And Shullette, I want to hear your views on what and how JAMPRO worked to change that perception as well with GSAJ. But the perception was not where it should be, was not as favorable as we would have wanted it back then. But the industry understood as well that the workforce didn't readily understand all the requirements of the industry. And so tools that were created, the career pathway framework, for example, 160 job roles that sought to outline expectations related to salaries and skill sets that could guide someone through the progression. Do you want to, if you wanted to move horizontally or vertically in this role, here's what would be required. And of course, the project layered on that career advisors whom have been getting, quite a few queries through our career advisor help desk, trying to help persons to understand and respond to their questions, and of course, a RISEC assessment. So this is not about me just outlining the achievements. It's really about hearing firsthand from the persons who were on the ground with us. So Shullette, back to you. Let's talk about how did the GSS project support investments to Jamaica? Expand a little bit on the private-public partnership for us in that role, and if you're able to share any stats on what those investments look like or are shaping up to be, we'd also appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Marjorie. So that public-private sector partnership for me had different layers to it. So as you mentioned, there was a partnership on the supply side in terms of labor and getting our workforce prepared for this industry, not only in terms of skills development and the areas in which they needed development, both technical areas and soft skills, but also in terms of, as you said, making sure that they understood the career opportunities that were in the industry. And that preceded the project, but really deepened during the project in terms of getting that information out there. And we would have had a couple of career fairs as well, in addition to some of the things that you mentioned, to get that message out there. And we had an entire campaign where we started to see people that were accountants and HR professionals and people that were doing not the typical what people thought about as the industry in terms of just answering the phone or inputting data, but a lot more value added. Legal process outsourcing became a thing. And so that partnership was because private sector was telling the story alongside public sector. So when we go to trade fairs, we take private sector with us, and the companies are there to talk about their own experience, in addition to the government talking about what we can do for you. And so it was very symbiotic, and I think also it allowed for a feedback loop where private sector can tell us what's going wrong, what's going right, and we can tell them the challenges that we're having and where we need support. So I thought that was very important to the relationship that we have in the project. In terms of statistics, I don't have the numbers offhand, but one of the things that was very important to understand when we talk about the private sector for this industry, it's twofold. It's the operators as well as the developers, the people that create the space for the industry. So we had the special economic zone regime came in right before the project started, and a brand new way of working for operators in the space. And Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority came in as another government partner alongside. We would have been there, Heart Trust would have been there on the education side. But we now have another partner that is looking at how do we provide incentives for the operators in the space or the developers in the space. And so, for example, we were able, I think right now we're looking at 1.2 million square foot of space dedicated to this industry. And then when COVID came, and I think that's where the strength of the partnership really showed up during COVID, because in very short order, the industry was able to be designated an essential service. People were able to move around even within the constraints of lockdowns. We understood that as a government that we were servicing other countries. And so even our situation here, we had to be very mindful of that. And we shifted to work from home. And that work from home is now moving to a permanent space in the offering of the industry. And we continue to lobby around some of the best practices that came out of COVID, because in every crisis, you have to find the positives that you can pull and keep. And work from home has been one of that. And we've been working very closely with the SEZ Authority and the association to make sure that that continues. So it's about cementing how the relationship works and evolving as we went along the way. The only statistics I can say unequivocally is that at the start of COVID, just before COVID, we were at 43,000 jobs in December 2019. And we're very happy about that because our 5-year strategy was successful.
Right.
And at the start of COVID, we went down very rapidly to 38. But very quickly after that, again, within 3 to 6 months, we surpassed that 43,000. And by the end of 2022, going into 2023, we were soaring towards 60,000, and now we're over 60,000. So I think with a growth rate of that during one of the most economic depressed times of the world, I think we can say without a doubt that that partnership really, really brought us through as an industry during those times.
Thank you, Shullette, and thanks for those points, because one of the underlying traits and really remarkable trait of this industry is its ability, its agility, and its ability to respond. And Anand, you were there, right? Just before COVID, one of the, apart from being designated an essential service, the GSAJ took the decision that they wanted their own disaster risk management framework to mitigate against future disruptions, not just disruptions as serious as the pandemic, but all types of disruptions because of how critical this industry is to Jamaica. Expand on that for us. Expand on that general responsiveness that I just mentioned, and why it's so important for an industry to pivot as needed in the face of uncertainty and disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. It was great, during that time to designate our industry as essential services. That was done in a very quick order. And even in reality, it forms essential services, right? Because you're talking to patients, you're talking to people who are really in need of help, and in volumes. And some of the large corporations, there are like, at least I would say 5 to 10 of the top 20 global companies are here in Jamaica. And so they are equipped with some level of business continuity planning and disaster recovery management. But there are so many other companies here who are doing fantastically well and moving the agenda forward. They may or may not have the support. And I think the collective effort of the association, large companies, and the government sort of helped us through the COVID. And I think we executed COVID management better than a lot of people. So that, I think kudos to all there. And coming out of that, like you said, there was an opportunity clearly seen that we got to have a clearer plan no matter what future holds us, so that it's not a heavy lifting scenario for the smaller and medium scale GSS operators. So I think that's where I would, thank GSS team to come to kind of sponsor that project and get that framework in place. Now that's accessible to people, accessible to companies, and GSAJ is kind of guiding them in the entire process. So I think it at least it's a relieving factor, right? Like Shullette said, every crisis you got to pick up something, an opportunity, and stick to it. I think this is one of those examples.
Right. Thank you, Anand. And it may be useful to share with the audience that the GSS has, was defined or is defined as being comprised of not just business process outsourcing, but information technology outsourcing and knowledge process outsourcing. So please don't think that we're just talking about the BPO, which is one of the three segments that we focus on. And Egbert, the GSSC was equally responsive, because we were just getting, so after the GSSC had worked, literally rolled up their sleeves, signed off on the curriculum, getting ready to start, and then, we had this situation. And I remember meeting with the team and saying, what do we do? Do we hold back? And they were like, no, we need to go ahead. And when we started the apprenticeship program, we started with only 143 apprentices. But what was so significant about that was, in spite of the pandemic, and in spite of the challenges we're facing there, the firms felt it was important and still important to invest in upskilling. And so we, on the project end, we had to think outside the box. We had to then shift everything from what was originally, I think, framed for a classroom type setting to, making everything virtual. Heart, as our beneficiary agency, was quite responsive, had their Moodle platform, thankfully, and we were able to roll that out. So, again, another example of how we were able to just meet and discuss the issues, so we didn't have to feel that we were alone in the process. We could easily reach out to your three groups and talk to them and get advice, because we always wanted to be sure that we were serving the industry. So, Egbert, let's shift a little bit to tips or advice that you would give to other sectors on the importance or why they should consider a sector skills council.
Well, Marjorie, we discussed this internally quite a bit in order to pass on the knowledge, right? And the few points that came across was the important aspects of the leadership. And here I need to point out Yanni in his first role as a chairman, is to have a leadership that drives the process and holds accountability, and someone that is not only successful with his own business, but someone that actually has the nation at heart as well. And I think those are some of the qualities that we've seen that are required by, I think, everybody that was sitting at the board. The common unifying factor of the success was that everybody was there to do something for Jamaica. Yeah. And we saw that, and everybody brought in their own expertise. There was no competitiveness going on between the private sector members. Everybody, yes, in the end of the day came together and said, this is what we need for the industry. And then the GSAJ did a great job, because even that organization itself has a strong leadership and a strong unification among all the players. And I think those aspects were very important in order for all of us to come together and do the right thing in the right way. And as well as the support from the ministries, from the Minister of Finance, JAMPRO, of course, and Ministry of Education and Ministry of Labor. So it was an overall point that everybody was sitting in the same boat. And I think because of that, even though with the COVID coming in between, everybody found a way to make it work after all. So yes, you correctly said we had to shift the approach, but all the members that were involved saw, I think, this pandemic as also an opportunity, because everybody found a way and saw that there's a way to invest now into the future. And we saw it in many other sectors as well, where the technology gap was closed so rapidly because of the force that was hitting, outside force that was hitting all these sectors. And I think everybody then, did that as well here, because we needed to come out after the pandemic with a much stronger case for Jamaica as a destination for the BPO sector.
Thank you, Egbert. But, I'm going to take a minute. Indulge me, if you don't mind, because, Shullette, I feel like we take these situations for granted. Remember, let's talk about what we had to start with. We had a strong investment agency who became an equally strong executing agency. We had a strong industry association that understood its own vision and role to support the growth of the industry. Then we had a Global Services Sector Skills Council that, even though they were competitors individually, collectively, they had a shared vision of where they wanted the industry to grow. And then, yes, you're right, Egbert. Let's definitely thank the Minister of Finance for also taking that chance and signing that loan agreement as the government's testimony of just how strongly it believed in the industry and wanting to ensure that the industry had tools to support that growth. So I just had to say it aloud. Bear with me, because I think, Shullette, we do take it for granted, and we don't understand what a strong foundation that forms for growth, for upskilling our workforce, and for strengthening our skills development framework. But the ecosystem, Shullette, let's go back a little bit to JAMPRO. Your achievements, what have been the achievements for JAMPRO as a beneficiary agency under the project?
Wow, those are numerous. I think the biggest one, of course, are the job numbers that we spoke about just now. It's definitely also, when I think about a more refined and competitive value proposition for the industry and how we position the industry to investors, both locally and overseas. And you're quite right, Marjorie, as we've gone through this project and we've moved the project through the different formats of outsourcing, we've also given a lot more attention to the IT outsourcing space. So companies like Egbert and companies like the Technology Accelerator project that we were able to launch last year are now a part of the JAMPRO fabric. They were never a part of who JAMPRO supported before. And while they don't have the same level of jobs that the BPO space has, they have a lot of potential as an export of services. And I think for us, recognition of the services space as export industries has been a very, very important milestone that we've seen, particularly late last year, when for the very first time in over a decade, our current account balance was actually positive because of our exports of services. So I think for us, it's the contribution to exports, contribution to the economy that we've seen this industry have, and the potential to do a lot more in the future.
Yes, Shullette, thank you. And don't forget, I want you to elaborate a little bit on some of the investment conferences you've had. I know that those were supported through the project, but you had a few major.
For me, Marjorie, and you're quite right. The investment conferences are a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see the success in the event, but in the jobs that came out of the event,
True.
in
Yes.
the exports that come out of the conversations that happened at these events, and the contracts that are secured by our local companies with overseas companies. So yes, we did have a couple of events that we were able to participate, both in the US and locally, because I think for the last 2 or 3 years, we would have hosted, or last 2 or 3 times, because sometimes we didn't have it because of COVID, we were able to support the Outsource to Jamaica event that is put on by the Global Services Association of Jamaica. And last year, we were able to host the Outsource to Latin America and the Caribbean for the first time in the Caribbean. And that was a huge, huge accomplishment for the country and huge exposure for the companies that were a part of that. And the year before that, in 2022, we were able to host the Invest Jamaica conference as well. And that exposure is what I'm talking about when we talk about the results that we have. So definitely, yes, there have been a couple of events and milestone activities that got us to where we were able to get to at the end of the day.
Thank you, Shullette. So just one last question for Anand and Egbert, and then I'll allow persons to give me their final comments. Anand, what are your thoughts on an apprenticeship program? How has it supported your firm's needs, the industry needs, and also your thoughts for upskilling generally for the industry? Where do you see that heading?
Yeah, I think the timing was, in a way, impeccable when GSS launched the apprenticeship program. 2010 to about 2020, 2012, so it's a 10-year time frame. The CAGR has been around 20% plus for Jamaica, so which is fantastic growth. And with that level of growth, naturally creates a vacuum in the leadership, because it's not easy to create hundreds of leaders, right? And I think the timing was perfect in terms of solving that mid-management capability problem, because the IQ levels, the comprehension levels always existed and exceeded perhaps, but you just needed the know-how and the framework to execute. And it's done well, as you quoted the numbers, and hundreds of leaders have come through that program, and the outcomes, like representing the industry, I can tell you the program has paid the dividends in the way that the operating performance of Jamaican GSS companies has moved away from solving for operational gaps. It's no more the problem. Like I run US, Latin America, and Caribbean operations, and least of my time goes in managing Jamaica because it's clockwork.
That's so good to hear.
The management, specifically the management IQ, right? Ability to not just respond, but forecast, predict, and preemptively address management. So I think Jamaica has come a long way. I actually spend more time with the US team than the Jamaica team. So I think is a testament. Well, it's my personal experience, and I've spoken to many of them, right? So that answers the first part of the question, that it definitely has given the results we expected. Now, as you know, in a way, the project has served the objective. The unemployment is at record low. So that's what the GSS industry in a way solves, is it creates employment, which I think is a goal well accomplished from everybody, I would say. Now is from unemployment to, if there are underemployment opportunities, you move them up the value chain, which I think is the thought process. The investments are in the right direction. So we continue in that process of driving the ITO, HRO, all types of outsourcing opportunities, compete in the global market space. There are some opportunities within the policies, which I think we're all thinking through on how it can help growth from here on. I think that's the direction in which the investments should be. is to move up the value chain. One, and two, if there is a way to widen the skill, right? Widen the employable labor pool, which I think is a conversation with the centered around the skills development. I think there are two-pronged approach going forward.
Okay, thanks, Anand. Thank you. Egbert, what are your views on upskilling? What do you see as a sustainable approach going forward? And I just want to get your general comments on skills for the global services sector, sorry.
Well, I mean, with the dawn of AI, I think the upskilling is going to be the next step that is required in order to ensure that we stay competitive, right? That is a very important aspect right now. I think it can be an opportunity, and it can also be a threat if it's not treated the correct way. And I think this is where we as a group need to continue to work together and ensure that we stay on the ball and ensure that the next set in the next 5 years, we're still ahead of the game. I always think that there are several ways on how AI will be incorporated as a business opportunity in the BPO sector in many different ways, not just for upskilling someone to actually work with AI in terms of training models and so on, but there's also a lot of lower hanging fruits that can be looked at in terms of business opportunities in the sector. So I think we need to just be aware and continue training the team members and training the businesses to understand the opportunities that are there.
Okay, thank you, Egbert. So one final question for everyone. What does the future of GSS look like? Who wants to go first?
Let me jump in. So, I mean, from a government perspective, the future of the global digital services is one and the same as the future of Jamaica, because digital transformation is coming at us. Egbert mentioned AI, and we're looking now as a country as to how these things filter into the fabric of our education system, of our skills development system. And I think as Jamaica becomes a more digital economy, then the opportunities around GDS would also expand. So I think the two of them are inextricably linked. And for me, JAMPRO and the association, the Global Digital Services sector as private sector, will always have that partnership to help shape what that looks like in the future. For today, that might be how do we ensure that we remove the threats that emerge as soon as they emerge for the industry. We're at 4.2 unemployment now in Jamaica. So we're looking at where do we get the next round of employees and increasing the productivity of our employees so that even if we can't increase the numbers, we're still increasing our output. And so there are a lot of discussions that we're going to still have to have beyond the project, but I'm confident that the partnership that we've cemented over the years will get us through that.
Thank you, Shullette. Who wants to go next? Call names. Egbert? Sorry.
Well, I think that the future is kind of very interesting in this sector if we do it right. Because of the use of AI and technology, we can actually broaden our reach beyond our current reach, especially with language barriers. So, and also in other ways where we can offer services that might not be a traditional BPO sector, but are required in order to foster the abilities of different AI models. And that requires a lot of data input. So there's a different ways that we probably over the next 5 years will find new business opportunities to enhance technology companies maybe that are overseas, and we provide some services to them in order to enhance the AI technology. and also to assist companies more in understanding how to provide AI models utilizing their own data. I know everybody is now working on ChatGPT and everybody uses it to be more efficient, but I think the next step, and this is where we need to be aware of in our sector, is to offer services to help companies on how to utilize their own data.
Right.
And I think that's where we need to be just looking out for opportunities and also, again, bringing the skills up to par for these kind of opportunities.
Right, and improve productivity, which I know, Shullette, is a more targeted focus, under the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, and as a result through JAMPRO as well. Anand, would love to hear your thoughts.
Time and again, I keep hearing the story that, what got us here is not going to get us where we want to get to. It sounds cliche, but it's very apt in the way we are. What the story that played for Jamaica and turned into a reality until now is not going to be the same going forward, especially with generative AI and everything coming into place. It's leveling the playing ground across the world. So, which means Jamaica will lose some of its historic advantages. It also means there are new opportunities that will emerge for Jamaica, which did not exist before, right? I think it's collectively understanding that, understanding that this worked for us, it's not going to work for us anymore. It's a hard one for people to come to that truth, but I think that will allow us to uncover, because the ground is getting leveled now, what other advantages are playing for Jamaica. And I think through that, through tech, through Gen AI and other evolving technologies, that I think it opens up tremendous opportunities overall, right? And internally, how quickly can Jamaica may be a $17 billion economy, but it could. There are opportunities to be sort of self-sustaining economy in some way, right? So that through digital services there, and figuring out the new story for Jamaica from now on, and driving, absolutely making it easy for, maybe 100 more people to get inspired from Egbert and, start doing the same, right? And scaling that business is really, I think, at the heart of growth going forward.
And then thank you for that, because I think that's such an important point you made. We cannot afford, like Egbert, we cannot afford to be complacent or take for granted an industry in spite of how significantly it has contributed to our economy. And so the points you made just now, Anand, are so important in the sense that they serve as an important reminder that we must continuously assess and self-assess and be prepared to pivot. I do think that we have the mechanism in place. Obviously, as any mechanism is, we constantly tweak and refine for the growth that we're seeking, right? And so I think that's an excellent note to end on, actually, because we need to remember as a country that we want to grow. We want to be a leader in the Caribbean. We are considered a leader in the Caribbean in many respects. And we must always strive for that next growth, that next area of excellence. And so I just really want to thank my team. I don't want to call them podcast members. They're family to me. And I really want to thank you firstly for just being on this journey with me. Let me take a moment and thank the 12 persons who support me. So the GSS Project is not Marjorie Straw. There are 13 of us who work tirelessly on different aspects of the project to make it a reality and to deliver on what we're required to do. And through your support, you have made our jobs a lot easier. And I really want to thank you personally for that journey. I want to just take a minute. We've said a lot, but for our audience, I think critical success factors for any growth, any sector growth, any focus on sector development requires a strong private-public partnership, requires a clear, shared vision. It requires a demand-driven skills development framework, and it requires all stakeholders within that partnership to be able to pivot and to identify solutions as needed to mitigate against disruption and to ensure business continuity and growth. And of course, that's just my abbreviated list. When you listen, you'll hear a lot more of what came out this morning. So my guest, I'd like to just invite the audience who's listening, please share your comments, put any thoughts you wish to share with us about how you feel about this podcast, and even what you'd like to hear in the future. Never mind that this is our last. The information will still be shared. I'm sure GSAJ or JAMPRO will respond as well if there's a need for another podcast, for another discussion, that burning discussion that you'd love to have. Share the link of our podcast, please, with your family and friends. The link is available on all our GSS social media pages. Please continue to follow us. There's still a lot of activity on all our pages, on our Facebook at GSS Jamaica, on Instagram. Send in your questions, please, to communications_GSS@jamprocorp.com. And what can I say? Thank you. Thank you, Jamaica. Thank you, GSS, GSAJ, GSSC, and JAMPRO for this remarkable journey. We know we have some behind the scenes work, so it's not like we're not going to see each other, but to the public, this closes out our final podcast. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Marjorie.